Welcome to our channel, Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. In a quiet suburban town, a couple thought they had found their dream home. But what seemed peaceful on the outside was hiding something dark beneath the soil. A storm revealed a buried box, and with it, the beginning of a mystery that had been silent for 20 years. What they uncovered in their own backyard would shock the entire town and reopen a case that everyone thought was forgotten. What if the house you moved into was hiding a secret grave beneath the backyard? They thought they were starting a new life. Instead, they uncovered a crime buried for decades. Ethan and Claire had always dreamed of living in a quiet neighborhood. After years of renting small apartments, they finally saved enough money to buy their first home. It was a white two-story house with a wide porch and a backyard that stretched farther than any they had ever had before. From the moment they stepped onto the lawn, they felt like they had found the perfect place to start their new life together. The real estate agent told them it was a bargain, and they thought they were lucky to get it. The first few days in the house felt exciting. Claire unpacked boxes, filled the kitchen cupboards, and made notes about painting the walls in soft colors. Ethan carried furniture, fixed small things here and there, and mowed the lawn. At night, they sat on the porch holding cups of coffee, listening to the crickets. The neighborhood seemed quiet and safe, but the backyard gave Ethan an odd feeling. It was large, fenced on three sides, with a patch of soil near the garage that looked uneven. He thought it was only poor landscaping, but every time he glanced at it, he wondered why the grass there never seemed to grow properly. Claire teased him about it, telling him he was just tired from the move, but Ethan couldn't shake the thought. On the third evening, while taking out the trash, Ethan stopped near the uneven soil. He knelt down and pressed his hand against the ground. It was softer than the rest of the yard. Something about it felt wrong, but he quickly stood up and told himself he was overthinking. The couple soon met their neighbors. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman with gray hair tied in a bun, brought them a basket of cookies. She told Claire that she had lived on the street for 40 years. She seemed kind, but her eyes lingered on the backyard when she stood at the porch, as if she wanted to say something but held back. A week later, Ethan was grilling burgers when Mrs. Patterson stopped by again. She smiled politely but lowered her voice. "You know, this house has history," she said softly. "The man who owned it before kept to himself. Children used to whisper that strange things happened in that backyard." Claire, standing nearby, laughed nervously. "You mean haunted stories?" Mrs. Patterson gave a small shrug. "Maybe, or maybe not, but people here still remember." She quickly changed the subject and left them standing there with uneasy smiles. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Around midnight, he walked downstairs for water. As he passed the back door, he heard something faint, like scraping or digging. He froze. The sound seemed to come from the patch of uneven soil. He held his breath, but when he opened the door and stepped outside, the yard was silent. The moon lit the grass in silver light. He walked to the spot and stood there, but nothing moved. He shook his head, telling himself it was just his imagination. The next morning, Claire went to the shed to find garden tools. She came out holding a rusted shovel. Its handle was cracked and the metal was stained with dirt that looked as though it had been there for decades. "Look what I found," she said, forcing a laugh. But Ethan didn't laugh. He stared at the shovel for a long time, a heaviness settling in his chest. The couple continued to live their lives, but unease followed them. Claire would sometimes wake up to find Ethan staring out the window toward the backyard. He said he just liked the night air, but she could hear the worry in his voice. The once perfect home began to feel different. Shadows seemed longer, and silence seemed louder. One rainy afternoon, Ethan stepped onto the porch and noticed that the rain was washing away soil near the garage. The ground looked as though it was giving up a secret. He leaned closer, and for a second he thought he saw a corner of old fabric peeking from beneath the mud. His heart skipped. He reached down but quickly pulled his hand back, unsettled by what it might mean. He told Claire, but she shook her head. "Don't start making up stories, Ethan. It's just dirt and old trash buried years ago. Please don't let this ruin our new home." Ethan nodded, but inside he knew he couldn't ignore it forever. The backyard was holding something, and sooner or later it would come out. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the fabric he had seen under the soil. The image followed him at work, during meals, even when he tried to sleep. Claire tried to distract him by talking about decorating the living room and planting flowers, but his thoughts always returned to the backyard. One Saturday morning, Ethan walked outside with a small spade in his hand. He told himself he would only check, just to put his mind at ease. He dug into the soft soil. The spade struck something hard. For a moment his chest tightened, but when he cleared the dirt, he found only a rusted tin can. He exhaled, half relieved and half frustrated. He covered the hole quickly before Claire came outside. Later that day, Mrs. Patterson visited again. She sat with Claire on the porch while Ethan listened from inside. Mrs. Patterson spoke in a quiet tone. "I don't mean to worry you, dear, but people say a young woman once lived here. She was seen in the yard often, then one day she was gone. No one knew what happened. The man who owned the house said she moved away, but not everyone believed him." Claire frowned. "Why hasn't anyone ever told the police?" Mrs. Patterson sighed. "They did, but nothing came of it. After all, there was no proof." When Ethan joined them, Mrs. Patterson gave him a long look before leaving. Her words stayed with both of them. That evening, another storm rolled over the town. The rain poured heavily, beating against the windows. Ethan stared through the glass, watching the backyard flood with water. Then he saw it again, soil slipping away and something pale beneath it. His breath caught in his throat. When the storm passed, Ethan rushed outside with a flashlight. The beam cut across the mud, and there it was. A small box, its corner sticking out of the ground. His hands trembled as he pulled it free. The box was old, wooden, and covered with mold. He carried it inside where Claire waited. They opened it together on the kitchen table. Inside lay faded photographs, a string of jewelry, and a note so smudged with water that only a few words could be read. "Never tell." Claire gasped. One photograph showed a young woman smiling in the backyard, standing near the same garage where Ethan had been digging. Claire looked at Ethan with wide eyes. "This isn't normal. We have to tell someone." Ethan shook his head. "What if it's nothing? What if it's just trash from decades ago? If we call the police, we'll bring trouble on ourselves. People will think we did something." Claire felt torn between fear and reason. "We can't just hide it. Something happened here. You can feel it," they argued late into the night, their voices rising, their nerves fraying. In the end, they put the box back in the shed, locking it away. But both of them knew the backyard was no longer just a yard. It was a place filled with shadows of the past, and those shadows were creeping closer. The rain had passed, leaving the backyard damp and heavy with the smell of wet earth. Ethan woke up earlier than usual, the memory of the wooden box heavy on his mind. He lay still beside Claire, listening to her soft breathing, but his thoughts were restless. He couldn't ignore what they had found. The photographs, the jewelry, the strange words on the paper, everything whispered that the house carried a dark story. By mid-morning, he went outside again, unable to resist the pull of the soil near the garage. He grabbed the rusted shovel Claire had discovered in the shed. Each scrape of the blade made his hands ache, but he kept digging. The ground was soft from the storm, and soon the hole grew deeper. Sweat ran down his forehead even though the air was cool. After several minutes, the shovel struck something hard. Ethan froze, his grip tightening. He dropped to his knees and brushed away the dirt with his hands. A corner of fabric appeared, old and frayed, the color almost gone. His heart pounded as he pulled more soil away. The fabric tore, revealing something solid beneath it. For a moment he thought it was just another box, but as the dirt fell away, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a box. It was bone. Ethan fell back, his face pale. The shape was small, but there was no mistaking it. He quickly covered it again, his chest heaving, and stumbled to his feet. He wanted to pretend he hadn't seen it. He wanted to go inside, drink coffee, and tell himself it was just a stone. But the image stayed clear in his mind. Claire called out from the porch. "Ethan, what are you doing?" He quickly filled the hole with dirt, forcing his hands to move fast. When Claire came closer, he stood and tried to smile. "Just fixing the soil," he muttered. She eyed him suspiciously but said nothing. They went inside for lunch, but Ethan barely ate. Claire talked about painting the kitchen walls, but he barely heard her. His mind was buried in the ground outside. That night, Claire woke up to find the bed empty. She walked downstairs and saw the back door slightly open. A beam of light flickered in the yard. She slipped on her jacket and went outside. There was Ethan, digging again. His flashlight lay on the grass, pointing into the hole. Claire gasped when she saw the fabric and the pale outline beneath it. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Ethan, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He looked up, his face streaked with sweat and dirt. "I found something," he said. "I think it's someone." Claire shook her head, backing away. "No, stop, cover it! We have to call someone!" Ethan stood, gripping the shovel. "If we call the police, they'll think we did this. They'll blame us." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "We can't just bury it again. What if this was a person who never got justice?" They stood in silence, the night air pressing down on them. The backyard felt colder than ever, as if the ground itself was watching. Finally, Ethan dropped the shovel and nodded. "Tomorrow. We'll call tomorrow. I need time to think." The next morning, Ethan tried to act normal, but his hands trembled as he held his coffee. Claire stared at him, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "We're calling today," she said firmly. Before Ethan could reply, a knock came at the door. He opened it to find a uniformed officer standing there. Behind him was Detective Karen Holt, tall with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Morning," she said. "We got a call from someone who said they saw digging in your yard late at night. Mind if we take a look?" Ethan froze, his heart pounding. He glanced at Claire, who looked just as shocked. Slowly, he stepped aside, letting them in. The detective walked through the house and out to the yard. She stopped at the patch of soil, crouched down, and studied it. "This looks fresh," she said quietly. Claire spoke up, her voice shaking. "We found a box, with photos, and maybe more." Detective Holt turned her gaze on Ethan, sharp and unblinking. "What exactly did you find?" Ethan swallowed hard, his mouth dry. I think there's something buried here." The detective nodded to the officer. Together, they began to dig. Within minutes, the truth was uncovered. Bones, wrapped in old fabric, lay beneath the soil. The officer stepped back, his face grim. Claire covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ethan stood frozen, his stomach twisting. The detective straightened, her eyes serious. "This is now a crime scene," she said. "We'll need to ask you both some questions." By evening, the backyard was filled with police tape and flashing lights. Neighbors gathered on the street, whispering and pointing. Cameras from local news stations arrived, their reporters eager to speak. Ethan and Claire sat inside, numb and silent, as officers moved in and out of their home. Mrs. Patterson appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face pale. She clutched a shawl around her shoulders and whispered to another neighbor, "I told you. I always knew something was wrong with that house." Inside, Detective Holt questioned Ethan and Claire separately. She asked when they moved in what they knew about the house and why Ethan had been digging. Ethan told her about the uneven soil, the sound at night, and the box of photos. The detective leaned forward. "And you didn't think to call us right away?" Ethan lowered his head. "I was afraid. I didn't want to get blamed." Detective Holt studied him for a long moment. Fear doesn't erase the truth. Secrets don't stay buried forever. When the questioning ended, Ethan and Claire sat together on the couch. Their home, once filled with dreams, now felt heavy with dread. The sound of shovels outside reminded them of the secret they had uncovered, a secret that would change everything. The flashing lights outside their home went on through the night. The sound of radios crackling, the shuffle of officers moving back and forth, and the dull thud of shovels digging deeper into the earth echoed in the background. Ethan and Claire sat quietly in the living room, hands clasped tightly together. They barely spoke, their minds racing with fear and questions. Detective Karen Holt walked back inside, her shoes leaving faint prints of mud across the floor. She stood tall, her presence calm but firm. She looked at them with sharp eyes, as if she could read their thoughts. "We've recovered partial remains," she said. "We'll need to take them for analysis. Until then, we'll be treating this house as an active crime scene." Claire's voice broke as she asked, Do you know who it is?" The detective shook her head. "Not yet. But there are signs that these remains have been here for many years, possibly decades. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. The photos we found. They showed a young woman in the backyard. Could it be her? Detective Holt leaned forward. Where are the photos now? Claire pointed toward the shed. An officer was sent to retrieve the box. When Holt opened it and spread the contents across the table, she studied them carefully. The faded pictures, the necklace with its broken clasp, and the smudged note. She held up one of the photographs, showing the smiling woman. Her expression tightened. This could be important. Do either of you recognize her? Both Ethan and Claire shook their heads. By morning, news had spread across the neighborhood. Cars slowed down to watch. Reporters stood at the end of the driveway, cameras ready. Neighbors whispered, glancing at Ethan and Claire as though they had invited the darkness themselves. Mrs. Patterson looked especially shaken, standing on her porch, clutching her shawl like a shield. Inside, Detective Holt continued her questions. She asked about the history of the house, about the man who lived there before them. Ethan recalled the agent saying the owner had been an older man, someone who kept to himself. Holt nodded, her eyes narrowing. Richard Hale, she murmured to herself. That name sounds familiar. Later that day, the detective returned with a folder of old reports. She spread them out on the dining table, her voice steady as she explained. 20 years ago, a young woman named Megan Turner went missing. She was last seen near this very street. Neighbors said she often visited this house. At the time, Richard Hale lived here. He was questioned, but nothing tied him to her disappearance. Without evidence, the case went cold. Claire covered her mouth. So that could be her in the yard? Holt nodded slowly. We won't know until we get the DNA results, but it matches the timeline. Ethan stood, pacing back and forth. How could the police not find this before? How could no one have seen it? The detective's voice hardened. Sometimes people hide things too well, and sometimes people don't look close enough. The weight of her words filled the room. Over the next 2 days, the yard was torn apart by investigators. Tents were set up, lights glared through the night, and evidence markers dotted the grass. More bones were uncovered, confirming that the remains belonged to one person. Each discovery added more pressure, more unease, and more questions. Claire could hardly sleep. She sat awake most nights, watching the yard from the window. Every time she closed her eyes, she pictured the young woman in the photograph, smiling, alive, standing in the same place that had now become a grave. Ethan grew more withdrawn. He avoided the neighbors, avoided the cameras, and spent hours sitting in silence. He blamed himself for digging, for uncovering what they could have left alone. But deep inside, he knew leaving it buried would never have changed the truth. On the third day, Detective Holt returned with news. We got a match, she said, her tone steady but heavy. The remains belong to Megan Turner, Claire gasped. Ethan sat down slowly, his head in his hands. She was 23 when she disappeared, Holt continued. Her family never stopped searching. They deserve answers. The detective explained that Richard Hale, the previous owner, was the main suspect back then. But with no body and no evidence, the case slipped into silence. Now, with Megan's remains found in the yard, the case was reopening. We're going to find him, Holt said firmly. Ethan looked up, his voice hoarse. And if you don't? The detective's eyes didn't waver. Then we keep digging. Secrets don't stay hidden forever. That night, Claire sat on the porch, watching the flashing lights fade as the police packed up for the evening. Mrs. Patterson walked over, her face pale in the dim light. She sat beside Claire, her hands trembling. I always thought something was wrong, Mrs. Patterson whispered. That man, Richard, he was strange. He never spoke much, never looked anyone in the eye. Some nights we'd hear noises from the backyard like digging, but we told ourselves it was just him gardening. We didn't want to believe something darker could be happening right here. Claire turned to her, her voice soft. Why didn't anyone say something? Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with tears. Fear, dear. Fear keeps people quiet, and sometimes silence can bury the truth just as deep as the soil. The words lingered in Claire's mind long after the older woman left. She stared at the backyard, the place where Megan's life had ended, and wondered how many secrets still lay beneath the surface. For the first time since moving into the house, she no longer felt like it belonged to them. It felt like it belonged to Megan, to her story, to her unfinished life. Ethan came out and sat beside her. They didn't speak. They just sat in the silence, listening to the night, both knowing that their lives would never return to the peaceful days they had hoped for. The backyard was no longer just a yard. It was evidence, it was history, and it was truth. And now, the hunt for Richard Hale had begun. The house no longer felt like a home. Every room echoed with voices from outside. Every shadow seemed heavier than before. Ethan and Claire tried to live normally, but it was impossible. The backyard was a crime scene, the center of a story that spread across the town and beyond. Reporters came daily, cameras flashing as they asked questions. Neighbors watched with suspicion, some whispering as if Ethan and Claire were somehow to blame. Detective Holt visited often, each time with updates that pulled them deeper into the story. One evening, she sat at their dining table with her files spread out. She spoke calmly, but her words carried weight. Richard Hale lived in this house for more than 20 years, she said. He was never married, never had close friends. Neighbors described him as quiet, distant, sometimes unfriendly. Megan Turner was last seen near here. Several people remembered her talking to Hale, but without evidence, there was nothing the police could do. Now that we've found her remains, the case has opened again. Claire's voice was soft, almost a whisper. So he killed her? He buried her in the yard? Holt didn't answer directly. We don't know yet, but we do know Megan never left town on her own. Someone ended her life, and Richard Hale is at the center of it. Ethan rubbed his forehead. Where is he now? The detective flipped through her notes. He sold the house about 5 years ago and moved out of state. He's been living under a different name, which makes things more complicated. But we're looking. Silence filled the room for a moment. The weight of those words pressed on Ethan and Claire. They had wanted a fresh start, a new life, and instead, they had stepped into a nightmare. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She walked through the house in the dark, her bare feet cold against the floor. She stopped at the back door, staring at the yard. Yellow tape fluttered faintly in the wind. She thought about Megan, about the smile in the photograph, about the life she had lost. She whispered to herself, "You deserved better." Ethan joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I keep thinking," he said softly, "if we hadn't moved here, if we hadn't dug, no one would have ever known. She would still be forgotten." Claire leaned against him. But now she isn't. Now the truth is out. The next morning, Detective Holt returned. She carried a folder filled with new documents. She laid them on the table and showed Ethan and Claire old police reports from 2 decades ago. They were yellowed with age, the ink faded in places, but the details were clear. Megan Turner, Holt explained, was 23. She worked at a diner in town. Friends described her as kind and full of energy. She was last seen leaving work one evening. A neighbor reported seeing her walk toward this house. After that, she vanished. Claire closed her eyes, her chest tight. And no one looked here? Not even once? Holt's expression was grim. They questioned Hale. He denied everything. Officers checked the property, but only briefly. They said the yard was normal, nothing suspicious. It was sloppy work, and Hale was clever. He knew how to hide things. Ethan's jaw tightened. So the police failed her. Everyone failed her. Holt didn't argue. She simply nodded. That's why we won't fail her now. Days passed, and the investigation grew larger. More officers came, bringing equipment, scanners, and files. Claire and Ethan were asked to stay in a hotel for a few nights while the yard was searched more thoroughly. They packed a few bags, their hearts heavy, and left the house in silence. At the hotel, Claire tried to keep herself busy, flipping through television channels, reading old magazines left in the lobby. But nothing distracted her from the thought of Megan buried in their backyard. Ethan spent hours sitting near the window, staring at the traffic below, his mind lost. On the 3rd evening, Holt came to meet them. She looked tired but determined. "We've confirmed the remains are Megan Turner's," she said. "And we've found something else. A bracelet with her initials. It was buried close to her. That, combined with the photographs, ties her directly to the property. Claire asked the question they both wanted answered. What about Richard Hale? The detective's eyes hardened. We found him. He's been living under the name Robert Green in another state. He's in his 70s now. But age doesn't erase guilt. We're preparing to bring him in for questioning. Relief and fear mixed in Ethan's chest. So after all these years, he might finally face justice? Holt gave a small nod. If the evidence holds, yes. That night, Ethan and Claire lay awake in their hotel room. Claire stared at the ceiling, whispering thoughts aloud. She was so young. She probably thought she had her whole life ahead of her. And he took it away. He lived free all these years while she lay in the dirt. Ethan held her hand. But not anymore. It's ending now. The following day, Holt called again. We've arrested him, she said over the phone. He denies everything, of course. But with Megan's remains and the evidence we've gathered, he won't walk away so easily this time. Claire felt tears of relief sting her eyes. Ethan let out a long breath, the first sign of release since the digging began. Still, the victory felt heavy. Justice was coming, but the cost was high. Their home, their peace, their sense of safety, all gone. When they returned to the house, the yard was quiet again. The police tape had been removed, the soil smoothed over. But Ethan and Claire couldn't look at it the same way. To them, it would always be more than a yard. It would always be a grave. As they stood there together, Claire whispered, We gave her back her voice. Ethan nodded, his hand tightening around hers. And now maybe she can finally rest. The news of Richard Hale's arrest spread quickly through the town. Headlines called him the man who hid a dark secret for decades. Reporters filled the streets again, eager to capture every detail. Some neighbors admitted they always suspected him. Others said they never believed such evil could exist so close. For Ethan and Claire, the attention was overwhelming. They couldn't step outside without seeing cameras pointed in their direction. Detective Holt visited the house once more, this time with a calmer air. She sat with Ethan and Claire at the kitchen table, her notes neatly stacked in front of her. He's in custody, she said. He continues to deny everything, but we have strong evidence now. The remains, the jewelry, and the photographs tie Megan to this house. The fact that her body was buried in the yard leaves little doubt. It's only a matter of time before we move to trial, Claire asked quietly. What happens if he never admits it? Holt met her eyes. Confessions don't always come, but evidence speaks. Juries listen to facts. Whether he admits it or not, the truth is here now. Ethan leaned back, his hands clasped tightly. I can't stop thinking about her. About all those years her family waited without knowing. And all that time he lived free. The detective's voice softened. That's the hardest part. But you uncovered what was hidden. Without you, this case might have stayed buried forever. That night, Ethan and Claire tried to settle back into their routines, but normal life felt distant. Every creak in the house, every shadow in the yard reminded them of what had been found. Claire avoided the windows that overlooked the backyard. Ethan stopped using the shed, unable to face the rusted shovel still leaning in the corner. One evening, they received a knock at the door. A woman in her 50s stood there, her eyes red from crying. She introduced herself as Linda Turner, Megan's sister. Her hands trembled as she held a photograph. I needed to see the place, she said softly. Claire invited her inside. Linda sat at the table, staring out the window toward the yard. Tears ran down her cheeks as she whispered, We never stopped looking for her. My parents died never knowing the truth. I can't believe she was here all this time. Ethan's throat tightened. We're so sorry. We didn't know when we bought the house. We only found out because of the storm. Linda reached across the table, touching Claire's hand. Don't apologize. You gave us answers. You gave us back my sister. Her words brought tears to both Claire and Ethan's eyes. For the first time since the discovery, they felt a small measure of peace. But peace was fragile. Days later, reporters returned with new questions. Someone had leaked details from the investigation. Stories about Richard Hale's past came out. Accusations of violence, whispers of other women who had gone missing but were never linked to him. The thought that Megan might not have been the only victim chilled Claire to the bone. Detective Holt confirmed the rumors during her next visit. We're looking into other cases, she said. There are similarities, but nothing proven yet. Hale lived in several places over the years. We may never know the full truth. Claire shivered. So there could be more? Holt nodded. It's possible. Men like him don't always stop with one. The words left a heavy silence in the room. Meanwhile, Hale's lawyers worked hard to paint him as an innocent old man, claiming the evidence was weak and circumstantial. But DNA from the remains confirmed Megan's identity. The bracelet with her initials found buried close to her body gave the case strength. Still, the trial would not be easy. Ethan and Claire were called in to give statements. They sat in a small office, speaking into recorders, telling the story of how they found the box, the digging, and the discovery of the bones. Claire's hand shook as she spoke. Ethan struggled to find the right words, his voice rough with emotion. Afterward, they walked out of the station together, the weight of it all pressing down on them. I feel like we're part of her story now, Claire whispered. Ethan nodded. We are. We're the ones who pulled her back into the light. The trial date was set. As it drew closer, tension grew in the neighborhood. Some neighbors avoided Ethan and Claire as if the house carried a curse. Others stopped to thank them quietly, saying Megan deserved justice. Mrs. Patterson brought over food one evening, her eyes wet with tears. You've done more good than you know, she told them. But inside, Ethan and Claire felt trapped. The house no longer felt like theirs. Every corner carried memories of what had been uncovered. Claire suggested moving, but Ethan shook his head. Not yet. We need to see this through. On the morning of the trial, the courthouse was packed. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashing as Hale was led inside. He looked frail, hunched over, but his eyes were cold. He avoided looking at Ethan and Claire, but they felt his presence like a shadow. Inside, the prosecutor laid out the evidence piece by piece. The photographs, the jewelry, the remains, the testimony. Hale's lawyer argued weakly, but the weight of truth pressed heavier with each passing day. Claire sat through it all, clutching Ethan's hand. She thought of Megan, of her smile, of her life cut short. She thought of the years her family had suffered without answers. And she thought of the night she and Ethan first saw the fabric in the soil, the night their lives changed forever. When the court adjourned for the day, Holt approached them. You've done enough, she said gently. You don't have to keep coming if it's too much, but Claire shook her head. We'll stay, we have to, for her. That night, as they returned home, the backyard was silent. The soil was smoothed over, the evidence gone. But the memory remained. Claire stood at the edge of the yard, her arms wrapped around herself. She whispered into the night. We'll see this through, Megan. We'll make sure he pays. And for the first time, she felt the silence answer back. Not with fear, but with a quiet sense of promise. The trial stretched on for weeks, each day filled with heavy testimony and evidence. Ethan and Claire sat quietly in the courtroom, their faces pale but steady. They were not just observers anymore, they were witnesses, tied forever to the case. The prosecutor showed the jury the photographs, the bracelet, and the DNA evidence. Each piece was laid down carefully, like stones building a wall of truth. Richard Hale sat across the room, his shoulders hunched, his face gray with age. Yet his eyes still carried a coldness that unsettled everyone who looked too long. He denied everything, shaking his head when the prosecutor pointed at him. I never touched her, he said firmly. This is all a mistake. But the evidence told another story, one that words could not erase. Megan Turner's sister Linda spoke during one of the sessions. She stood before the jury, her voice trembling but strong. For 20 years, we waited for answers. For 20 years, my family prayed for justice. My parents died never knowing what happened to their daughter. But today, the truth is here. Please don't let him take that from us again. Her words filled the room with silence. Even the judge paused before continuing. Outside, the case drew crowds every day. People gathered on the courthouse steps, holding photographs of Megan, demanding justice. News anchors repeated the story, calling it one of the darkest secrets the town had ever faced. For Ethan and Claire, it was strange to see their home on every screen, their backyard turned into a symbol of truth, finally uncovered. One afternoon, Detective Holt joined them in the hallway during a break. Her expression was calm but serious. "We're close," she said. "The jury has heard enough to understand what happened." "No matter what he says, the facts can't be buried again," Claire asked softly. "Do you think he'll ever admit it?" Holt shook her head. "Men like him rarely do. They'd rather carry the lie to the grave. But his denial doesn't erase what you found. Megan's story is being told." As the days passed, the tension grew thicker. Ethan struggled with sleepless nights, replaying the moment he first struck the fabric with his shovel. Claire kept hearing the sound of rain washing away the soil, the night the secret first began to show itself. They were haunted by the beginning, but they stayed strong for the end. Finally, the trial reached its close. The prosecutor gave the last argument, his voice steady and clear. Richard Hale thought he could hide the truth beneath the ground. He thought time would bury his crime. But secrets don't stay buried forever. Megan Turner's story has returned, and now it is up to you to give her the justice she deserves. The jury left to deliberate. Hours passed, each one stretching endlessly. Ethan and Claire sat together, holding hands so tightly their knuckles turned white. Linda sat nearby, her eyes closed, whispering prayers under her breath. At last, the jury returned. The courtroom filled with silence as the foreman stood. The words came slowly, but each one carried weight. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Richard Hale, guilty of murder." A gasp ran through the room. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Ethan's chest released the breath he had been holding, and Linda covered her face with her hands, crying quietly. For the first time in decades, Megan's name was no longer tied to mystery. It was tied to justice. Hale sat motionless, his jaw tight. He did not look at anyone, did not speak. The judge announced the sentence, life in prison without parole. The gavel struck, and the case was over. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Linda hugged Ethan and Claire. Her tears wet Claire's shoulder as she whispered, "Thank you. If it weren't for you, we would never have known. You gave us peace." Detective Holt joined them, her face tired but relieved. "You two did something most people would never have had the courage to do. You faced the truth, even when it was painful." Ethan shook his head. "We just moved into a house. The truth was already there." Holt smiled faintly. "But you chose to see it. That made all the difference." In the weeks that followed, the attention slowly faded. The reporters left. The neighbors returned to their routines, and the town moved on to other stories. But for Ethan and Claire, life would never be the same. They tried to live in the house again, but every glance at the backyard brought the memories back. Claire would pause at the window, picturing Megan's smile in the old photograph. Ethan would avoid the garage, unable to step near the soil he had dug. The house no longer felt like theirs. One morning, they sat on the porch together. The sun was rising, casting soft light over the neighborhood. Claire turned to Ethan. "I don't think I can stay here." "Not after everything," Ethan nodded slowly. "Me neither. This isn't our home anymore. It's hers. It always will be." A month later, they packed their belongings and left the house behind. They drove away in silence, watching the place shrink in the rearview mirror. For them, it was not just a house. It was a grave, a courtroom, and a story too heavy to carry forever. As they settled into a new home in another town, they carried the memory of Megan with them. They spoke her name softly, remembering the young woman whose life had been hidden in the soil. They knew justice had been done, but they also knew the scars would remain. Detective Holt visited once, months later, to let them know the case had closed for good. Hale remained in prison, silent and unrepentant. But Megan's story had given strength to others, reminding people that silence only protects the guilty, and secrets never stay buried. On the anniversary of the trial, Ethan and Claire returned quietly to the cemetery where Megan was laid to rest. They placed flowers at her grave, standing side by side in the soft wind. Claire whispered, "You're not forgotten anymore." Ethan squeezed her hand, "And you never will be." They walked away together, leaving the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. The chapter of buried secrets had closed, but the truth would live on, in the memory of a young woman finally brought into the light and in the hearts of those who refused to let her story remain in the ground. The world of true crime, But there are many more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe to Crime Loom.